A new world? Labour and the Conservatives were both hit hard by Nigel Farage's reform. How will they answer it? Zia Yusuf, the chair of Reform's here for the first time. So is the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, and Labour's Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davey, joins us from Dorset, and 5 out of 5, the Greens' Adrian Ramsay, will be with us too. We'll put your thoughts to our 5 politicians this morning. But after all that talk, there's time for a bit of music. Movie star Jeff Goldblum's side hustle.
I was a bad student, I had some facility, but I didn't want to practice, and he would know that I didn't practice. But then he gave me a sheet of music after I did, Charney and different things. He gave me this piece of music. I just liked it.
And Queen of the Royal Watchers, Tina Brown, is here. We'll be talking to her about Prince Harry's emotional interview, along with stalwart of the Labour movement, Christina McAnee, boss of the union Unison, and watching her old party, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Justine Greening. And morning. Let's start, as we always do, by what's making the headlines today. The Sunday Times splashes with comments from the chair of Reform, who's with us today, saying that the young need moral education. The Independent quotes none other than John Curtice. We'll hear from him in a bit on Labour's woes. The Sunday Telegraph says Badenoch will not chase Farage to the right. We'll ask her later. The Mail on Sunday, though, leads on the royal rift. And the Sunday Mirror looks ahead to the VE Day celebrations later in the week. And here at the BBC, we're reporting a moving story of 8 men who've been arrested today in a counter-terror plot investigation. So, a huge few days of news, a really big change in the political environment. Justine, watching on, do you think this is a seismic shift, as Nigel Farage claims, or is it just a moment of a bubble?
I think it is a big shift, actually. I certainly think for this version of the Conservative Party, that's now finished. And I think if it's to have any future, it will have to substantially reinvent itself. I don't see a way back. Wow, you think the Tories are finished if they carry on this trajectory? I think this version of the Conservative Party that we've seen over the best part of a decade, that has been trying to out-reform, I think that experiment is demonstrably failed, and the party has reached a literal dead end.
Wow. Christina, you've part of the Labour movement, have watched the Labour Party for a long time. This was a grisly set of results for a party that just in July got a whopping majority. What are they getting wrong?
I think this is as people have said, it's a wake-up call for the party and time for a reset. And just talking in sound bites and rhetoric won't work anymore. People expect more from a Labour Party, especially those who voted for them, obviously, and they're not getting it at the moment. And they need to feel better about the world and about their own lives. And sadly, that's not been delivered so far.
So what would a reset look like for you?
So for me, a reset would look like, we keep being told the world has changed. I've heard senior politicians say this all the time. So they need to look at changing some of the policies that they so far have set for themselves. And one of the big ones for me would be relaxing the tight fiscal rules that they've set. That would give them a bit more flexibility in terms of where they could spend money.
Tina, you spend most of your time in the States today. We've talked to you before about Donald Trump. When you look at what's happening with Nigel Farage, do you think there's a parallel there?
There are similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. Obviously, Farage, like Trump, vivid personality, immigration, DEI, these are the things that it's very easy to say. I think the difference really now is we've now had 100 days of Trump, and we know that he's the king of chaos, and we know that all the jingoistic phrases and phrases like waste, fraud and abuse sound great. When you start finding that waste, fraud and abuse means that everybody's getting laid off in all these agencies, etc., across America, it doesn't feel so good anymore. And he's got the worst poll ratings of any president at 100 days in 80 years, which is quite extraordinary. So there is time to make it up.
OK, well, we'll see, because we'll talk to 5 different political parties today on the show. So it's going to be a busy one, with Reform triumphant, Labour and the Tories both bruised, and the Greens and the Lib Dems reasonably pleased with themselves. But what does the nation's favourite number cruncher, Professor Sir John Curtice, make of it all? As ever, we've given him just a minute.
Reform won most votes, most seats and most councils by a country mile. Never before has a party other than the Conservatives and Labour topped the local polls. The Conservative Party put in what was by far its worst local election performance ever. It lost 45% of its seats to Reform. Labour hoped to make gains, profiting from the Conservative fallback. Instead, its vote fell back more heavily than that of any previous newly elected government. At 32%, Reform's share of the vote was just as high in previously Labour-held wards as it was in Conservative ones. In contrast, Liberal Democrats and the Greens managed to fend off Reform's challenge in their wards. The Liberal Democrats did little more than hold their share of the vote, but the fall in Conservative support enabled them to make gains where they were the Conservatives' principal challenger.
Well, let's speak to one of the victors. The chair of Reform UK, Zia Yusuf, is here for the first time. Welcome to the studio. We can show people also some pictures of you pacing up and down at the Runcorn by-election, those nervous few hours when it just did come down to 6 votes. Let's start, though, with one of the big promises you've made, that you're going to cut waste in the councils that you now control. How much money do you think you're going to save by cutting equality, diversity and inclusion policies? You've talked a lot about that in the campaign. How much money do you think you'll save?
Well, Laura, this was a historic set of results. I think that's the first thing to say. It was a turquoise tidal wave. I think it's going to be looked back on as the most important set of local election results in British history. We won 32% of the vote share, 40% of the seats. We've taken control of 10 councils, 2 mayorships. And look, we're going to work really hard for those constituents because we have a clear mandate. And in terms of things like wasteful spending, look, the first thing to say is our assessment of how much can be saved is based entirely on trying to assess these freedom of information requests. And there's a limit to what you can do with that, candidly. What I will say is that even within those FOIs, we can see that Lancashire County Council saw fit to spend £500,000 on ergonomic chairs for its staff. Northamptonshire County Council spent £1.1 million handing out free vapes. Look, what people want at a local level is not the world. What they want is their bins collected at least once a week, at least ideally twice. They want potholes fixed in exchange for the millions of pounds that is being spent on it. And they don't want their council tax going up 10 to 30% because councils keep going bankrupt. And Reform will deliver on those things.
And you know that the vast majority of council money goes on things that councils legally have to do, like special needs education for children, care for the most elderly and vulnerable in our society through social care. But I want to stick on this because you've made a lot of promises about saving money from waste, from equality, inclusion and diversion and diversity. We've had a question from Alan in Barnard Castle, County Durham, a council you now control. And he said the bins are collected on time, potholes aren't nearly a problem that they are in other counties. What exactly do you object to about equality and diversity and inclusion? What's the problem?
Well look, so in places like County Durham, there is a lot of disaffection about local government. There was a ward in County Durham where Reform won 65% of the vote share from a standing start.
And no one's disputing your success, but what's the objection to that kind of thing that councils do, equality, diversity and inclusion policies?
Well, the objection is very simple. We believe all hiring should be merit-based and colour-blind, and the best person should get the job, regardless of any immutable characteristics or anything else. And DEI is the opposite of that. Look, ultimately, one has to choose between equality of opportunity or equality of outcome. And I keep going back to it. What constituents want, and the evidence for that is the overwhelming landslide victory Reform just won, is they want simple things like bins collected on time. While, you know, your viewer is saying there's not an issue there, we've spoken to many people. That's why we won a landslide, who are deeply unsatisfied at the way local government is run.
The question here is that you've said you can save money by cutting waste in this area.
Sure.
And we've checked with some of the councils that you won. Lincolnshire County Council said they don't have any staff doing those kinds of jobs. Staffordshire County Council told us they don't have any staff doing those kinds of jobs.
With respect, Laura.
Let me finish. Nottinghamshire County Council says they employ one person doing that job. And you said throughout this campaign, by cutting that kind of waste, you can save people money on their council tax bills. If there's hardly anybody doing these jobs, you're not going to save any money.
So I spent quite a lot of time actually looking at these freedom of information requests. And what you find when they respond to them is they're very loyally and very precise in their language. It's like getting blood out of a stone. If you take Lincolnshire County Council, yes, they do not currently have somebody with the job title DEI officer. They do spend considerable money on DEI initiatives, and they have other people who have basically that same job but under a different title, partly in response to the fact that they've been inundated by think tanks and activists putting in FOIs. What we are going to do, and this is our commitment to the British people, sure, we don't have a magic wand, but we will cut ways. You can hold us to that. We are going to send teams in, task forces. We'll be opening up applications shortly. We want the brightest and the best. If you've got experience in audit, if you've got experience in fixing potholes, if you're a software engineer, we're going to bring task forces in. We're now going to have access to the contracts, access to the numbers, access to payroll, and we're going to make these changes. And once we have done that analysis, we will share it with the British people.
So you'll come back and tell us how much money you think you can save.
Absolutely.
But at the moment, you don't know. Let's talk about another kind of contract. Nigel Farage and other Reform UK politicians have said that you will reject migrants going to areas that you now control. How on earth can you do that when migrants get sent to go and live in hotels because of contracts between the Home Office nationally and 3 big providers? So how will you actually do that? Because, again, we've checked this. The break clauses for these contracts is not till 2029. So aren't you promising something you can't deliver?
What Nigel promised, look, so we are realistic about the fact that, yes, we won an overwhelming victory yesterday, but the levers of power at local level pale in comparison to the levers of power in Westminster. So that's why this is part of a journey to making Nigel the Prime Minister with a Reform majority. However, what our commitment is to our constituents and the people who voted for us, this is our mandate. Those levers of power will be pulled with all of our might by Reform councils. We'll use every instrument of power available to us to stop it. And there are things you can do. There are judicial reviews. There are injunctions. There's a lot of different things that can be done. Things around planning, around budget allocation as well.
You've told people on a specific point, and people care a lot about having asylum hotels in their communities. This has caused a lot of concern to many people. But you've told them that you will reject migrants going from the council areas that you now control. How will you actually do that? Because the contracts to house those people are between the Home Office and accommodation providers. You don't have the power, perhaps, to keep the promise that you've made.
There are instruments of power available to us.
Well, like what?
Judicial reviews, injunctions. There's planning laws. You know, a lot of these hotels, and there has been litigation around this already. A lot of these hotels, when you suddenly turn them into something else, which is essentially a hostel, that falls foul of a number of regulations, and that's what our teams of lawyers are exploring at the moment. And we can look at budgets as well. So the word we used was resist. Look, we're not in government yet. That's our plan, and that's why people watching this programme who believe in these values, who don't want to live around people whose first action upon coming to this country was to break our laws and then to live at the behest of taxpayer money.
But the question here is the difference between saying things and doing things. Yeah. And you will be in office now in local government in much of England, and you've told people publicly that you will resist migrants coming to their communities. Yeah. But you don't have the direct power to do anything about it. Are you saying Reform's lawyers will try to use the courts to close asylum hotels? I'm trying to understand what you'll actually do.
There are a number of instruments at our disposal, which our teams are working. We've only just won the election, right? So what we're going to be doing in Reform Control Council, this is our commitment. We will use every instrument available to us. And those include things like injunctions, those include things like judicial reviews, those include things like actually enforcing the planning laws, because we think a lot of these changes that are being made are in violation of a number of these laws. And we're going to look at budget reallocation
Your new
as well.
mayor in Greater Lincolnshire, Dame Andrea Jenkins, said asylum seekers should go in tents. Is that now the party policy?
That's what France does. Do you think that's unreasonable?
Is that now
and
the
do you
party's
think that's
policy?
a reason why? Do you think that's a reason why? Do you think that's a reason why people come across the English Channel? They risk their lives coming across the English Channel to come to the UK because we're a soft touch, Laura.
But the question here is that now Reform UK's policy? And France does not put all of its migrants or people who are seeking asylum in tents.
But it does put some of them.
The question is that now the party's policy, that that's what you want to do, is house asylum seekers in tents?
Laura, we held a press conference around 10 days ago when we announced that we will be publishing a plan to deport everybody who is currently in this country illegally in our first term of government. We will publish that plan in the coming weeks and you'll see the full detail. OK.
Your brand has been based on accusing the other parties of not keeping the promises that they've made to the electorate. And clearly there's been a lot of public frustration and you've done incredibly well in these elections. But listening to you this morning, you can't yet tell us how much money you think you'll save on the promises that you made during this election. On other things, you're essentially saying, wait and see. You'll look at the levers available or the plan will be coming. Have you actually, as of today, off the back of this victory, got detailed plans to deliver what you've been elected to do?
That's literally what we've been working on, right? I mean, the election was a couple of days ago, and we are very confident we'll be able to save a lot of money because we have spent a huge amount of time in the last few months. It's part of why we won the election, Laura. We were very clear. You know, we held that big conference in a big event, 8,000, I think, people turned up in Birmingham to see it. And we went through a huge amount of things that are just objectively wasteful ways that taxpayer money is being spent in these councils. And that is the mandate, Laura, that we have got from voters in overwhelming fashion. So, look, we've just won the election. You know, we've got 677 councils. They're electing their leaders as we speak. Our commitment to the people who voted for us and the constituencies, yes, we will save you significant money. Your bins will be collected on time. We will fix your potholes. And there will be a new approach to local government, which will be based around common sense and competence.
OK, well, we will see. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Zia Yusuf, good to have you with us in the studio for the first time. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Well, Nigel Farage branded this election the beginning of the end for the Conservatives. And we can show you some of the sad faces with those blue rosettes on Thursday night. The party lost more than 600 councillors and all 16 of the councils that they held going into the vote. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has described the election results as a bloodbath, and she's apologised to councillors who lost their seats on Thursday night and Friday afternoon as the results came in. She's with us in the studio. It's good to have you with us. You've said many times people are cross with what you did when you were in government and that this is a protest vote. But how can you be sure that this rejection of the Conservatives isn't permanent? Justine Greening's just told us the Tories are finished.
We have to make sure that it is not. That is what I was elected to do, to renew our party and rebuild trust with the public. But that does take time. And one of the things which I said when I became leader was that the road was going to be bumpy. No party has come back in one term from the sort of defeat that we had. I'm going to do that. But the way to do that is by making difficult decisions, thinking very clearly about what policies we're going to bring in, not just making announcements, but having a proper plan.
But in 1998, after the Labour landslide then, the Conservatives actually gained councillors. And by some measures, this is the worst local election results for your party ever. You said Reform's a protest vote. You've also said the Lib Dems are a protest vote. And basically, it's going to take time. Isn't it a bit complacent just to say, I need a bit longer, it's going to be tricky? Have you got time to do that?
So in 1998, they were not having elections after an unprecedented high. The elections we had 4 years ago, we did better than we'd ever done before. Even in good times, we would have had a worse result. And I am sorry to all of those councillors who've lost their seat.
But the point here is that the party's performance has got worse on your watch.
If I could finish the first question. 4 years ago, Keir Starmer had his worst result. He is Prime Minister now, with a landslide majority. We live in politically volatile times. And what I've been saying is that we are going to take the slow and steady way. There will be bumps along, but we can do this, and we will do it in 4 years, not 18 years, 14 years, 13 years, like previous oppositions.
But the point here is that since you have been in charge, the party's performance, both in the national opinion polls and then on Thursday with real-life votes, the party's gone down on your watch. And if you look at other parties, other places in Europe, whether it's France, Italy, Poland, to name just three of them, the traditional right-wing party in those countries has been usurped. They've been replaced by others coming along. So are you sure that's not going to happen to you?
Yes, and that is because we are working on a plan. When I came in, I said it was likely to get worse before it got better. And protest is in the air. What we had was Labour saying, all we need to do is get rid of the Conservatives and everything will be better. Things got worse. Now we have Reform saying, all we need to do is get rid of the Conservatives and Labour and everything will be better. I suspect things will get worse. But protest is in the air. Yesterday, I had a meeting with councillors in Hertfordshire, some who won and also candidates who lost. And what they said on the doorstep was that people were frustrated with the previous government. I was not leading the previous government. We are going down a new path.
You were in the
previous
government.
They voted for me because of my record in government. I'm one of the people who was trying to fix the things that went wrong. But what they said on the doorsteps, that immigration is still an issue. We try to fix structural problems in our society, ageing society, people living longer, not enough people having children. We try to fix all this with immigration. That has not worked. Immigration has now become a problem. We need a party that's going to have credible solutions to fix all that.
But isn't it dangerous to dismiss this incredible result for Reform as just a protest rather than something more serious? I mean, we've had an email in from one of our viewers, Anthony, who said the Tories have been roasted because they stopped being Tories about 14 years ago. And one of your ex-council leaders says, you've not helped. Jason Smithers said that you need to resign. What's your personal responsibility in terms of what's gone on?
What everyone has said, that this is something, as your reader mentioned, that has been 14 years in the making. That's not going to be fixed after 6 months. This is 6 months into a 5-year project. And what we are doing is steadying the ship, being united. A lot of the instability of the past has gone away, but I am not being complacent. I am not dismissive. Reform had a good night. We had a bad night. And what this shows for a lot of people who hoped that just changing leader again would fix everything is that that's not going to be enough. We tried that previously, and that brought us to our historic defeat.
But I suppose the question is, what are you going to do differently? I mean, you got walloped, for want of a finer word. This was a terrible performance for your party.
That is something that we always knew was going to be the case. We said it was always going to be challenging. We said things would get worse before they got better.
Than
but the question you asked, Laura, was what am I going to do? I'm leading from the front. We are going to make sure that we have a credible offer that the public can believe in. We're going to be honest with people about what's wrong with our country and how we fix it, not just with slogans and announcements, not just with easy promises, because we have a government that did that. What is more astonishing is that less than a year in, after a landslide, Labour had worse results than what it had 4 years ago when people were asking Keir Starmer to resign. We have serious problems in our country that need a serious party.
I just wonder...
We are down, but we are not out. It is my job to make sure that the Conservative Party turns itself around quickly enough.
What do you think that Nigel Farage is getting right?
He is expressing the feeling of frustration that a lot of people around the country are feeling, but he also doesn't have a record in government like the two main parties do. Now he's going to be running some councils. We'll see how that goes, but he is expressing a feeling of frustration. That is not my job. My job is to come up with answers and solutions, but also to let people know that we get it. We understand why they were angry with us. We understand why they removed us from office. They're not going to come rushing back just because Labour was bad. They are looking at the two parties as parties that haven't delivered, and I need to come up with a plan that will deliver. Easy announcements and easy slogans are not a plan.
But maybe people agree with Nigel Farage's ideas. Maybe they like the sound of this. And I come back to your suggestion that this is a protest vote. If you rely on calling it a protest vote, the implication is you just think it will go away. You know,
no,
a protest vote is a sort of temporary
I certainly do
thing.
not believe that. But look at the numbers.
You don't think this will go away?
This was 30%. These things, we look at what's happening all across the world. You talked about France. Look at what's happened in Canada, where a Conservative leader of the opposition, 23 points ahead when I met him in December, lost his seat this week. Same thing happened in Australia yesterday.
So could that happen to you?
So anything can happen. That is why we are not being complacent. You asked me what I think is happening. I've said I do think it is protest, but that doesn't mean we sit back. We are going to come out fighting. We are going to come out with the policies that people want to see. But what we are not going to do is rush out and tell the public things that are not true just so we can win votes. This is not about winning elections. This is about fixing our country. Yes, of course, you need to win elections to do that, but you also need a credible plan. We've seen what happens with Labour. You come in without a plan, just winning, and everything gets worse.
Do you think it's feasible that Nigel Farage could be the next Prime Minister?
As I've said, anything is feasible.
Anthony
Albanese said, people were writing him off. He's just won a landslide. But my job is to make sure that he does not become Prime Minister because he does not have the answers to the problems the country is facing. How do we increase productivity? What is the plan to improve our environment while dealing with climate change? How do we make sure that we can deal with an ageing society, people not having enough children? Immigration, a big issue. His answer is to have another minister. We have two ministers who are dealing with that. Those are not serious solutions.
Do you think people should have more children?
I do, but that's a personal choice. But we have to look at the demographics of our country. We cannot solve it with immigration. It is making things worse. It's making us all poorer, and none of the problems are being fixed.
OK, Kemi Badenoch, thanks so much for coming in. It's been a very busy and tiring days for everyone who works in politics, so we're grateful to you for being with us this Sunday morning. Well, it was tricky for the Conservatives, very, very tricky, but it wasn't a much prettier picture for the Labour government. They lost the Runcorn and Helmsby by-election. There's the victorious Reform new MP alongside a grinning Nigel Farage there. There was only 6 votes in it, but it had been a rock-solid Labour seat. And they lost councillors, a far cry from July. You've probably heard Keir Starmer's new mantra now. The government will go further and faster. to get things done. But is that going to be enough to cheer voters back up? Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, is with us. Thanks so much for coming in. Let's start, because we love hearing from our viewers. Let's start with a question from Philip, who says this about Keir Starmer. What he fails to see or is not willing to admit is that the local election results show people are not happy with the changes he's making, changes that were not in his general election manifesto. Do you admit that lots of voters just don't like what you've done in office?
Well, there's no doubt, and I campaigned in a by-election in my own patch in Runcorn across the country. There's no doubt that there are some individual things that we've done that people have not liked. What I would say in defence of those decisions is we knew at the time that, to be honest, every single measure we've taken to raise more money for the National Health Service, for example, has not been popular and has been contested. But the reason we've done that is because people wouldn't thank us if we left the NHS rotting in the crisis that we inherited. Thanks to those decisions, we've seen NHS waiting lists fall 6 months on the trot. The 2 million more appointments we promised in our first year, we delivered 7 months early, already over 3 million. But I also understand why, I'm sure it's happening right now as we speak, as I'm on the telly saying waiting lists are falling, there'll be people shouting at the telly saying, hang on a minute, I'm still waiting. And both of those things are true. Waiting lists are falling. There are still 7 million cases on the waiting list. So I understand why, whether we're talking about waiting lists, whether we're talking about interest rates falling 3 times, whether we're talking about wages finally going up above inflation, people won't necessarily be feeling the change yet. And we know, the Prime Minister knows this, that's why he's talked about the need to make progress further and faster, that unless people feel this country has changed and changed for the better at the next general election, people will look for change elsewhere. We know that.
People are feeling some of the changes that you've made, changes you didn't tell them about in your manifesto in the election campaign. People are feeling the difference from winter fuel allowance being taken away from millions of pensioners. Businesses are feeling the difference having to pay more national insurance for their staff. There are changes you've made that you didn't warn people about that people don't like. And telling people again and again you're going to go further and faster with things that they don't want, is that really going to cut it?
Well, it's the outcomes people want to see. They want to see safer streets. They want to see stronger, more secure borders. They want to see waiting lists falling. They want to see the cost of living improving. Those things do take time. And you don't turn around a country with the range, the breadth, the depth of crises we inherited. You don't turn that around in just 9 months. So all I'd say to people, we've got the message. We're not daft. We haven't got our heads in the sand. All I'd ask people for is to give us a bit of time and to give us the benefit of the doubt, to recognise the range, the breadth, the depth of the crisis that we walked into. We're going at those challenges as hard as we can, as fast as we can. We're as frustrated and impatient about the challenges and the change that's needed in the country as everyone else.
But people's frustration isn't necessarily about the challenges that you faced on getting into office. People's frustration are with the decisions that you have made. So I'll just ask you again, telling people again and again, Keir Starmer says it, you've just said it, minister after minister after minister says, we have to go further and faster. That's a slogan that suggests to people that you're just not listening to them, actually. You're going to do more of the same, more of the things that they don't like.
No, on the contrary. And the Chancellor's been very clear with the Cabinet and with the country that we can't just kind of keep reaching for the tax lever to solve our problems. We've got to do more on the reform side, making sure money's better spent. That's why, although the Chancellor has invested £26 billion more in the NHS, made possible because of those choices, not all of which have been popular, but I would argue as Health Secretary, the right choice to invest in the NHS. I'm also going hard at the layers of bureaucracy in the NHS to make sure the money that's already going in, as well as new money, goes as far as it possibly can, that we're having real impact on the front line. And that's true for my colleagues right across government.
I just wonder, though, after 9 months, nearly 10 months in office, you are a not-so-new government anymore. You're not babes in the wood who've just arrived. Is there anything, as we were asking Kemi Badenoch the same question, is there anything that you look back now and think, oh, yeah, maybe we should have done that differently? I mean, I just wonder, maybe you shouldn't have spent so long when you moved into Downing Street as a party telling people how dreadful things were. Maybe people are gloomy because you told them to be gloomy.
I just think honesty is the best policy. And, we came in, we knew the country was in a state. That's why people chose change. We'd prosecuted that argument in opposition. There were some things that we walked into that were genuinely even worse than we feared. When I walked into my department, for example, the Department for Health and Social Care, I was told that instead of delivering 40,000 more appointments a week, which was in our manifesto, the first step we promised, that I'd have to instruct the NHS to deliver 20,000 fewer appointments every week because the money wasn't there. Our predecessors had spent money that wasn't in the Treasury. And we could have just gone, oh, well, that's a shame, and gone to the country and said, oh, I'm sorry, we've broken our first step on the NHS. The Chancellor and I didn't do that. We made a different choice to invest in the NHS in year, as well as the new financial year, which has only just started.
Raise people's taxes to do it, but that was your choice.
Whether it's those
you're
taxes
explaining your choice.
or the things that were in the manifesto, like the private school VAT, going after non-DOMs, asking the wealthiest to pay more. Those things have been contested too. These things, raising money is never popular. But what I hear from our opponents is a lot of criticising how we raise the money at the same time as often saying we should be spending even more. You've got to make choices. We've made those choices. And I hope and believe that over the course of this Parliament, as people not just see the improvements in the numbers, but feel the improvements in their lives, that people will think, OK, the change we voted for is happening. I'm just asking people to give us time, give us the benefit of the doubt, recognise that turning around a country with the breadth and depth of the crisis we have does take time.
You say you are listening to the public. Was your colleague Lucy Powell listening to the public when she said about grooming gangs that have appalled many people? She said it was a dog whistle when a reform activist expressed concern about it. Does that look like she was listening to people who are terrified about that whole saga?
Well, Lucy's apologised for those comments, and it's right that she's apologised. What I would say, and I've been in plenty of those debate formats myself, sometimes in the heat of the debate, you say something that comes across badly that you wish you hadn't said.
She's a member of the cabinet.
Yeah, but she's also human, and I've made mistakes in the past. I'm sure I'm going to make mistakes in the future. She's mortified, and she does not want and would not want people who've campaigned on or been victims of these most appalling crimes to think she was in any way trying to undermine those experiences or those arguments. I think the point she was trying to make, and the point I would make, is on such a serious issue, the more we can take the heat of the politics out of this and get to the heart of the challenge, the better. That's why, since we've come in, we've asked every police force in the land to look again at all of those cases that were marked no further action.
But everyone knows that there's going to be no national inquiry. But just as we've got you, when it comes to your job as Health Secretary, there's an important debate going on around public sector pay. Now, some doctors are balloting again for strike action. Nurses said no to 5% last year. The Royal College of Nurses is currently surveying their members about what they want to do about pay. You spent a lot of taxpayers' money trying to end strikes last year. Are you going to do that again, or are strikes a real possibility?
Well, what I'd say to resident doctors who are currently balloting is they'll see and receive in the coming weeks the recommendation of the pay review body. So I'd urge them to kind of wait and see the figure that's recommended and how government takes that forward, same as the rest of the NHS workforce. I do understand, and I've got a lot of sympathy with the arguments that are being made, particularly by the lower paid members of the NHS workforce. Whether you're a recent, relatively recent graduate, as many resident doctors are, often in their 20s and 30s, struggling with the cost of living. If you're a nurse, you're often, looking at every month the money that's coming in, but also the bills that are stacking up and having to make some really difficult decisions. So we do want to make sure that people are paid fairly. That's why the Chancellor, within days of coming into office, acted to implement all of the recommendations of the pay review bodies last year, and also gave me the mandate to resolve the resident doctors' strike. So I think I'd say to people at the moment, judge us on our record here. We came in within days. We dealt with those public sector pay issues. We resolved the resident doctor strikes. I want to work with NHS staff, not just on pay, but also on the wider terms and conditions and the experiences they're working in.
OK, I suspect that's a conversation we'll probably come back to. Very briefly, the big story this morning, an important story. We're hearing that police have arrested 8 men across the country in separate investigations into counter-terror plots. Is there anything that you can tell us about that?
Just to say, firstly, thank you to police and the security services for the work that they are doing in these cases and do on a daily basis. It is work that is often unseen, where success goes untrumpeted, because the nature of those investigations, it is often highly secret and highly sensitive. We'll obviously keep the public updated as we can. Given these are live investigations, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment further. But it is a moment just to remind everyone that every single day these people are saving lives, and without the naming, the praising, the credit that other people get in other walks of life. So we're very lucky to have them.
OK, Health Secretary Wes Streeting here for the Labour Party this morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, of course, we always want to know what you think. We've had some of your questions for our politicians this morning. You can keep them coming in. The email address is there. If you're social media minded, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura Kay, and the WhatsApp number is there as well, 08000 282 161. Let's talk straight away then to the leader of the Unison Union, Christina McAnee, somebody very important in the Labour movement. You said there needed to be a reset. You heard Wes Streeting there. What did you think of what he had to say? Doesn't sound like much of a reset on the way.
Well, I hope that there will be, and actually, I think Wes is doing a pretty good job as the Secretary of State for Health. I think one of the problems we've got at the moment in the Labour Party is that everybody's talking about all the mistakes they've made, and they have definitely made mistakes, but we're not really talking up or hearing about all the other things that they've done. So, certainly from my perspective and our union's perspective, we've got an employment rights bill going through Parliament at the moment, which is, the biggest shift to workers' rights for over 70 years. It's going to get rid of 0 hours contracts, it's going to end fire and rehire, it's going to give sick pay rights from day one, it will give us a fair pay agreement in the care sector, all things that the country's crying out for and that people desperately need. We've seen what they've done in Scunthorpe on British Steel. Waiting lists are coming down. Last year we got above inflation pay settlements in parts of the public sector, particularly in the NHS. So these are all the good things that need to be talked about, because certainly most of the media won't be reporting on those things, because most of the media is not particularly Labour friendly. So the party has to talk about it, the government needs to be talking about it, and as do others. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there's major problems. So, Wes spoke about pay at the moment in the NHS. NHS workers were due to get their pay increase on the 1st of April. And yet again, we're waiting. So people don't know what they'll get. We've been asking for them to get rid of the pay review body and just go into proper negotiations that we've got in Scotland, and that actually does come up with better results.
Justine Greening, when you heard Zia Yusuf talking about what Reform is going to do, there was quite a lot of "we'll get back to you, we'll let you know." What did you make of what he had to say about their plans, or lack of detail in their plans?
I felt like they were insubstantial versus the promises they'd be making to people. I thought it was worrying that, having made such a big deal about waste, I think everyone would agree that we need to cut waste out of any tier of government, including local government, that in a sense there wasn't any idea as to how much there was to go at. I think you've got to wish anyone who's coming in to lead a local council well. We want well-run local councils delivering great services. But yes, I think to hear that they're now going to be starting to work on these plans, I think most people would have preferred to see the plans there before.
And then it comes to Kemi Badenoch saying again and again, look, this is a protest vote, there's protest in the air. I just want to bring people with an interesting email from Ronnie, one of our viewers, who said, I don't think Reform is the answer, but I want to send a warning shot to the Labour Party in the hope of getting them to wake up, to become the party they once were, a party that had the back of the working class. Tina, you've been watching politics here as well as in America for a long time. Does this look to you like a blip of protest or something bigger that's going on?
Well, no, I do think it is a warning shot. But I also think that, to me as an American, I look at Nigel Farage and I think, wait a minute, weren't you the Brexit party? Whatever happened to the trade deal? Whatever happened to bringing immigration down? But Farage is such a brilliant cross-dresser in politics that he's able to just sort of flip around and elide, because he's such an amazing communicator. And I think that, the Labour Party should have actually hung that round his neck. But at the same time, Keir is in a vice, really, because he's actually governing. So he, for instance, can't go out there and be like a big warning about Trumpsters, etc., because he's got to deal with Trump and he's got to get his trade deal and he's got to, he's dealing with Ukraine. So he's in a much more constrained situation. The other problem, of course, is that we're living in an era when people want vivid personalities. They just want them. It's the entertainment age. And unless you're a vivid personality, it's really hard to get your message across. And Keir is not that vivid personality, but I'd much rather be Keir than Kemi this morning.
But that's an interesting thing, though, isn't it? Do you think, Christina McEnany, there's an issue with Keir Starmer not looking like he's sort of rolling his sleeves up to get stuck into this? He didn't go to Runcorn in the by-election. Nigel Farage was there all the time, banging on doors, and we know from talking to Reform sources that one of the things they did is they went on, banged on doors of voters who the other parties hadn't spoken to for a long time. I mean, doesn't Labour need to look more vigorous, more active, as Tina's suggesting?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I'm sure there's people doing the post-mortem as we speak about how could they have turned out that extra 6-7 votes that would have made a significant, that's all it would have taken. That's 2 doors to knock on to try and get people to come out. So I'm sure that's all happening. But I think Tina's absolutely right. That the problem you've got is when you're in government, it's completely different from when you're in opposition or when you're, you can promise anything. And it was just interesting listening to the chair of the Reform Party. I mean, their naivety, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt would say they're naive. I think probably more likely they're just misleading people. All these promises they've made. Now they're going to come bang up against the harsh reality of trying to run local authorities, which have seen their funding cut to the bone since 2010, been cut by at least 30%. And he never mentioned the 2 biggest areas where local authorities spend their money, education and social care. And once you take that out of the equation, there's very little left in local authorities to spend on all of the other things. And it's total nonsense what they've been saying.
Justine, I know you said very starkly before we spoke to Kemi Badenoch that the current version of the Conservative Party is finished. To get the Conservative Party back on track, in your view, what does she need to do? And listening to her this morning, do you think she understands what's going on?
I think the party needs a sense of purpose again. People need to know what it stands for, and that then informs the policy agenda. For me, it's always been obvious the party should stand for equality of opportunity, social mobility. The policy agenda should flow from that, whether it's within government, whether it's what businesses who have opportunities do with them, how they reach them to communities that need them. It's got to be really around how we can develop the talent that Britain's already got. I heard Kemi talk about people having more children twice. We've got a lot of children. Let's develop the ones we've got in our schools. Let's look at how we can make sure that those gaps don't open up in the education system, as they already do. There are some really practical questions facing the Conservative Party, but I think more fundamental is, what is the point of the Conservative Party now? And if we can't find an answer to that, then we shouldn't assume things won't continue to get worse. OK, all 3 of you, thanks for now. Be back with you later in the programme. Now, there's, of course, another party in the mix here, the Liberal Democrats. And as Professor Sir John told us earlier, the party's share of the vote largely held steady. But the collapse in the Tory vote meant they gained 3 councils, Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Shropshire, where Ed Davey was celebrating with an ice cream on Friday, and their leader, Sir Ed Davey, joins me now. Good morning to you, Sir Ed. You're claiming now to be the party of Middle England. Good morning. Good morning. But your share of the vote didn't move in a meaningful way. With the Tories in free fall and the government unpopular, shouldn't you have been absolutely hoovering up in terms of the overall share of the vote?
Oh, we had a fantastic night, Laura. For the first time ever, winning a majority in Oxfordshire, in Cambridgeshire and Shropshire, becoming the largest party and almost winning in Devon and Wiltshire and Gloucestershire and Hertfordshire. So, yeah, we were very pleased with our results. And, we're now the second party in local government, overtaken the Conservatives, and I think we're on track to overtake the Conservatives at the next general election. So either whichever way you look at it, it was great results for the Liberal Democrats.
You're in almost, I think, the leafiest place I've ever seen. I mean, you're very obviously targeting leafy Middle England, but does that mean you've, slightly given up on other parts of the country? Because in days gone by, the Lib Dems campaigning machine might have gone gangbusters in Runcorn in that by-election, for example. There are other pockets of more urban areas where you might have gone very, very strongly. But now you're branding yourself so overtly as Middle England. What about the rest of the country?
I think Middle England is the rest of the country. It's the whole country. It's the vast majority of people who want common sense, practical, centrist politics and policies to fix the things that need fixing, whether it's potholes or social care. And, you know, we are now the official opposition in County Durham. It was the Conservatives and Labour losing seats to reform there. We actually gained seats, and we're going to hold reform to account. We had great results in Hull and East Yorkshire. Didn't quite get over the line there, but really good result, brilliant team performance. And in the next year's local elections, in many of those northern cities, I really expect us to do well. And actually, it was in the south where reform got beaten. It was the Liberal Democrats holding back reform in a place like Buckinghamshire, for example. And so I'm really proud, and I think this is a massive step forward for the Liberal Democrats. I think our community politics, our focus on the issues that matter to people is coming through. And, you know, I'm proud it's the Liberal Democrats being taking on reform. And I think it can work if we show that their support for people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk actually isn't very popular. Look what Mark Carney did in Canada, defeating a hard right opponent by standing up for patriotism for Canada. Anthony Albanese in Australia defeating a hard right candidate, another person who liked Trump. And I think if we can expose the fact that Nigel Farage is so keen on Donald Trump, that will mean that Liberal Democrats come through. I've been very disappointed in the way that Labour and Conservatives have almost copied reform and moved towards reform. I think we should call them out for what they stand for.
Nigel Farage, though, interestingly, once said he took his inspiration from the Liberal Democrats with your local branches, local councils, local progress. If he's taken inspiration from you, doesn't sound like it, but I'll try my luck. Would you take any inspiration from him?
Listen, he clearly doesn't share our values. I don't share his. And, you know, I think what's going to happen now they've actually got to run councils, we will see what they do. You know, in the election, Nigel Farage said they should cut funding for special education needs and disabled children and young people. I think families across the country will be really worried by that. When polls closed, he said he wanted to ape Donald Trump and Elon Musk's policies in town halls. And, you know, look at some of the other policies. If he's really going to do what he says, presumably he's going to stop insulation programmes that keep people's energy bills down and keep people's homes warm if he does what he says on climate change. So I think we'll hold him to account, you know, Laura, and I'm very confident that people will increasingly see that it's only the Liberal Democrats taking on this divisive populist politics. And I just urge your viewers to Google "Let's join the Liberal Democrats" and come and join us.
Well, I think
both in our success in community politics and taking on reform.
I think the election campaign is over, but of course you're encouraging people to back your party. But the campaign is over. But interesting to hear your perspective on what happened. Thank you very much indeed for joining us as ever this morning. And we should say, all this talk of English councils, in Wales and Scotland, there are big, important elections next year, and then in Northern Ireland, elections in 2027. So that's why the focus this time round has been on what's happened in England, because that's where the elections were this time round. And of course, there was another competitor who gained some seats, the Green Party. They did make some progress, but their share of the vote, according to our national projection, actually went slightly down. I spoke to their co-leader, Adrian Ramsay, and asked him why.
What we saw in this election was an 8th year in a row where we've left the election with record numbers of Green councillors. So we took some big strides forward right across the country, as we've done over each of the last 7 years. And that's regardless of the wider political circumstances. And you look at how well Reform have done in this election, but actually their success is not built on strong foundations. Many of their people have been elected without having strong roots in their local communities. It remains to be seen whether they'll be willing to put in the hard yards. Green councillors have a strong track record in our communities. People know what we stand for, fighting to protect local services, defend our environment, get more affordable housing. Whereas I'm now deeply worried about where we're left with Reform, arguing for cuts to local councils that are already severely overstretched, people unable to get places in special educational needs for their children. We're seeing public transport decimated around the country, and nationally we're seeing our NHS overstretched. So we need to be ready to take the argument to Reform.
But the question remains, I mean, as you've just said, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the two big parties, but in these elections, people went much more convincingly to Reform and indeed to your other rivals, the Lib Dems, than they did to the Greens. So why aren't you able to capitalise on the public unhappiness in the same way that Reform and the Lib Dems have been.
Well, we have made big strides forward in these elections. Of course, I want to go further. And John Curtice has highlighted, as many commentators have done, that we now have an era of 5-party politics in England, 6 parties in Wales, people increasingly thinking about where they're going to go. And this is a time when the Green Party's growing, and I'm ambitious for what that next stage looks like for the party. I want us to take another big step forward. And I'd say to people looking around, looking at the fact that this Labour government has come in, is cutting funding in real terms to the NHS, to funding for local councils and other frontline services, is removing the winter fuel allowance, is removing the support, crucial support from some of the most ill and disabled people in society. If you want a different approach, if you want a livable future, a fairer future where we support the most vulnerable, invest in our public services, then do what so many other people are doing, do what record numbers of people are doing, and join the Green Party. Be part of our movement for a fairer future, for saying we can fund the NHS if we ask the very richest in society to pay a bit more. We can have a livable future where we take the climate action that Reform is trying to stop and make sure that we do have a livable future for our children and grandchildren, and do it in a way where we support the most vulnerable people in society.
Well, as I was saying before, I thought the election campaign was over, but there we are, Adrian Ramsay from the Greens. Now time for something different. The Hollywood legend Jeff Goldblum has been a fan favourite for decades, whether in Jurassic Park or Independence Day or the smash hit Wicked. You might not know, though, he's a jazz musician on the side. His new album, Still Blooming, is out, and he's had a little help from some very famous friends. He'll play for us at the end of the show, but when I met him, he told me how he started out as a kid.
I played piano when I was a kid, and the fact that I get to do this now was never part of the plan. I wanted to be an actor, you know, but I kept playing the piano, and I became disciplined, and I play every day. So it's a joy to share this with people and to play with these great musicians. There are vocalists who join us on this one, if I may, I'll tell you. Ariana Grande.
Oh, a few people have heard of her.
Well, I did that movie Wicked with her and the great Cynthia Erivo. And when we were on the set, you know, we got to talking and singing. They agreed to do tracks on this thing.
And
we'll
Scarlett
meet again.
Johansson as well. So.
Then Scarlett Johansson, I'd done a couple of Wes Anderson movies with, and we got to talking. She said, yes, I'll do something. She wanted to do this bossa nova version of The Best Is Yet to Come, which I'll bet you know. Tony Bennett originally did it. You know it?
Yeah,
Go ahead, let's sing it together.
I'm
Ready?
not going to sing it. You're going to sing it for
you, Laura. Here she is, Laura Kuenssberg. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out of the tree of life, I just picked me a plum. Look at you, perfect time.
I'll click, but I'm not singing.
I like your clicking, but you do sing. The way you said that makes me feel that like you're not going to sing now, but you do sing.
Sometimes I sing in the studio before we go live while we're rehearsing, but no one ever sees it apart from people who are there. So we're not going to do it now. What I want to know...
Note to editor, keep that in. That's a nugget that must be explored.
We put music on, but we'll put your album on this week. Why jazz? What brought you to jazz in the first place?
It's just in me. Some people are kind of classical, and I like all sorts of classical music and other kind of music. But when my piano teacher, I was a bad student, he gave me this piece of music, Alley Cat. And that syncopation is what they call it. I just liked it. So, you know, and then different these chords that started to happen, you know, when I'd follow these, you know, I went, oh, geez, that's something.
You mentioned there the Wicked. You mentioned it a few times. Wicked, huge smash. You were in it. Who is the real wizard?
He's he's a complicated guy. And he's a phony, and he's a snake oil salesperson and an advertiser and a propagandist. And he wants to enhance power or status, sometimes by doing the very ugly thing of othering or scapegoating others. That's not a nice thing that he's done. So, you know, has a moral struggle.
It's been such a success, and the second movie is coming. Do you think that's partly because there are lessons from how the world is now?
There certainly are themes in it of misuse of power and, you know, the friendship between these women and them finding their heart and their power. And just the joy, the wild-hearted joy of it is a delightful tonic to times of shadowy confusion of one kind or another.
What do you mean by shadowy confusion?
Oh, well, the outer world as it exhibits itself and develops politically, culturally, that can be, dark and confused morally.
You're going to play for us in just a sec. So what are you going to play for us today?
A song called Blue Miner, written by Sonny Clark. He's from Pittsburgh. I'm from also Pittsburgh, so that's a little special to me. He's an unsung hard bop hero, under-recognized, but the jazz community is just crazy about him. So we'll play a snippet of that and see if you dig it.
I'm sure we will. Jeff, thanks so much. A pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And you'll hear that in just a couple of minutes. As we come to a close, Tina, you've written more about the royal family, studied them more in several books than many, many people. As you're here, Prince Harry's extraordinary interview with the BBC this week, saying his father won't talk to him, deeply unhappy about not being allowed to have security. Buckingham Palace have said, look, these issues have been examined many times in the courts with the same conclusion reached every time. What did you think when you saw that interview?
Well, what I thought was that after 5 years, Harry is still at war with his original mistake. And every time he goes on the air, he makes another one. So it's like he is now trapped in this terrible cycle of doubling down on the original mistake. He was told so clearly when he was considering leaving by the palace at that time, the security won't be paid for anymore. He was told it again and again. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to listen to it. I think he thought he could just blow it off and in his reckless, sort of hot-headed Harry Hotspur way, charged out of the royal family with all of these issues completely unresolved. There was no way that this court was going to go against the findings of the security, the police. They're not going to go against that. And they're not going to go up against the police, against the royal family or the police. And secondly, I didn't hear two very crucial words in that entire sort of Jeremiah about, I'd like to reconcile was, I'm sorry. I mean, he never said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I caused my family all of this pain. And that is really what they're upset about, not the security.
And he's had this long-running fight over that, but of course also a long-running fight with the press. And I know that's something that you are thinking about what's going on with the press a lot at the moment.
Yes, I'm going to be hosting on Wednesday the Truth Tellers Summit in Investigative Journalism to honour my husband, Sir Harry Evans' legacy. And we have an incredible day where we're looking at what's happening to the press because we are under assault in the US, completely under assault. I mean, Trump has just gone for the journalistic jugular. We're in a situation now where public funding, for public broadcasting has now been completely cut. He's gone to war with universities. He's gone to war with, making it easier for journalists to be subpoenaed for their records. It's really become a very scary situation. Rather as if we were sort of heading for the kind of authoritarian atmosphere that we've actually featured on our stage before. This year, actually, we have Yulia Navalny, which is very exciting. We have Jeff Goldblum, who, of course, the editor man of the hour, who was included in the Signal chat. And we have Alistair Campbell interviewing James Carville.
Well, sounds like a very busy agenda. Just very briefly to you two, finally, do you worry about what's happening with the press in the States? Christina, briefly.
With
the press, what's going on in the press?
Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely see what's happening there is that, Trump has just decided to ignore reality and ignore the truth. And it must be incredibly hard, but I'm worried that the press are in some ways kind of acquiescing to that with a few notable exceptions, and that's incredibly worrying to see that.
All right. Well, a very interesting conversation, Justine. I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you all three of us so much for joining us this morning. Thank you to all of my guests, and thank you, of course, most of all to you for watching at home. After an extraordinary few days in politics, it's just about time for a lie down. I'll be with Paddy O'Connell on Sunday's newscast in a bit, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. Same time, same place. But as promised, here's Jeff Goldblum to take us out.
A 1, 2, 3, 4.